The Apache girl's words cut through the desert air like a blade. I belong with a man like you. But when tribal warriors come to drag her back, will love be enough to defy an entire nation? Stay with me until the end of this tale of forbidden passion and impossible choices, and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The wolf's yellow eyes gleamed with hunger as it circled the fallen Apache man, its massive paws silent on the rocky ground. Blood seeped from deep gashes on the old warrior's leg, painting the desert stones crimson in the dying light of dusk. Death stalked closer with each predatory step. Elias Halt had been riding the boundary of his ranch when he heard the growl, low, menacing, primal. His weathered hands tightened on the reins as his horse, Thunder, snorted nervously. For a moment he considered turning away. Apache territory meant trouble, and he'd had enough trouble for 3 lifetimes. But the scream that followed wasn't the sound of an animal. It was human, desperate, defiant. "Get back, you devil!" The old man's voice cracked like a whip across the canyon. Elias spurred Thunder forward, his Winchester rifle already in his hands. He'd sworn off violence after burying his wife Sarah 5 years ago, but some oaths were made to be broken. The wolf turned at the sound of hoofbeats, its massive head swiveling toward this new threat. It was bigger than any wolf Elias had ever seen, easily 150 pounds of muscle, fang, and fury. Its coat was silver gray, marked with scars from countless battles. "Easy, boy," Elias whispered to Thunder, who was dancing sideways, nostrils flared with fear. The horse had faced down stampeding cattle and rattlesnakes, but this ancient predator stirred something deeper, an ancestral terror written in blood and bone. The Apache man struggled to sit up, his dark eyes fierce despite his wounds. He was old, maybe 70, with silver hair braided with eagle feathers and a face mapped with the lines of a hard-lived life. War paint streaked his cheeks, though whether for ceremony or battle, Elias couldn't tell. "American," the old man called out in accented English. "Go away, this is not your fight." The wolf's lips peeled back, revealing teeth like ivory daggers. It was deciding between 2 meals, now the wounded man or the mounted one. Elias raised his rifle, the wolf's ears flattened against its skull. "Maybe not," Elias said quietly, never taking his eyes off the beast. "But I'm making it mine." The wolf lunged. Thunder reared, screaming. Elias fought to stay in the saddle as his horse pivoted and bucked. The world spun sky-earth fangs, the metallic taste of fear in his mouth. His finger found the trigger just as massive claws raked across Thunder's shoulder. The Winchester's report echoed like thunder through the canyon. The wolf twisted in midair, Elias's bullet catching it behind the shoulder. It hit the ground hard but rolled, coming up snarling. Blood matted its silver fur, but its eyes still burned with predatory intelligence. "Stubborn bastard," Elias muttered, working the lever action. The brass cartridge spun golden in the last rays of sunlight as it flew from the chamber. The wolf gathered itself for another attack, muscles coiling like steel springs. But something had changed in its yellow eyes, not fear but recognition. It had faced men with guns before and learned respect for their thundersticks. With a sound halfway between a growl and a whine, the great beast melted back into the rocks and shadows, leaving only bloodstains and the memory of death's close passage. Elias kept his rifle trained on the spot where it had disappeared until Thunder's breathing steadied beneath him. Only then did he look down at the wounded Apache. The old man was watching him with eyes like black flint, unreadable and ancient. His leg was torn badly, 3 parallel gashes that went deep into muscle. Without help, he'd bleed out before midnight. "Why?" the Apache asked simply. Elias dismounted his boots, crunching on loose stone, because it was the right thing to do. The right thing. The old man tested the words like they were foreign to his tongue. "You know who I am, American. Can't say I do." Elias knelt beside him, examining the wounds. They were clean but deep. The wolf had been going for the femoral artery, a killing strike. But I know you need help. I am Nayati of the Chiricahua, war chief. I have killed many of your people. Elias looked up from the torn flesh. The name was familiar, whispered in saloons and around campfires. Nayati the Ghost, they called him, the Apache who struck like lightning and vanished like smoke. His raids had terrorized the territory for 20 years. Well, Elias said, tearing strips from his shirt, today you're just a man who needs doctoring. He worked quickly, binding the wounds with practiced efficiency. He'd seen enough injured animals and men to know what he was doing. The old warrior watched in silence, his face giving nothing away. I cannot walk, Nayati said when Elias finished. I can see that. My ranch is 3 miles south. You can rest there until you heal. And then, Elias helped him to his feet, supporting his weight. Then you go wherever you were going before that wolf found you. Nayati was quiet as Elias helped him onto Thunder. The horse snorted and shifted but accepted the double burden. As they rode through the gathering darkness, the old chief finally spoke. You have a family rancher. Had. Wife died of fever 5 years back. No children. The words came out flat, worn smooth by repetition. I am sorry. Life's hard, then it's over. They rode in silence after that, the desert settling into its nighttime rhythms around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, lonely, wild, free. Elias's ranch house sat in a shallow valley, protected by hills on 3 sides and a seasonal creek on the 4th. It wasn't much to look at: weathered wood, a tin roof, and windows that needed new glass. But it was home, or as close to home as anywhere could be, without Sarah's laughter filling the rooms. He helped Nayati inside, settling him on the couch near the stone fireplace. The old warrior's eyes moved constantly, cataloging exits, weapons, advantages, old habits. You live alone, Nayati observed. Mostly. Elias lit a kerosene lamp, pushing back the darkness. Got a couple of hands who come by during roundup, but it's just me, most times. Lonely. Peaceful. Elias fetched his medical kit, a wooden box filled with bandages, laudanum, and the tools of frontier medicine. He'd learned field surgery the hard way during his years as a cavalry scout, before Sarah had convinced him to hang up his saber and try ranching. This is going to hurt, he warned, producing a needle and thread. Nayati's weathered face cracked into what might have been a smile. I am Apache. I know pain. The stitching took an hour. Nayati never made a sound, though sweat beaded on his forehead and his hands clenched white-knuckled on the couch arms. When it was done, Elias bandaged the leg properly and gave him a measure of laudanum for the pain. You are skilled with healing, the old chief said, his voice heavy with the opiate. Had to be. Out here you doctor yourself or you die. A practical man, a living one. As the fire crackled in the hearth, painting the room in shifting gold and shadow, Nayati studied his unlikely savior. Elias Halt was a big man, 6 feet tall and broad-shouldered, with hands scarred by rope and leather. His brown hair was going gray at the temples, and lines mapped the corners of his blue eyes. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced danger and survived, but there was a sadness in him too deep and abiding as winter. You saved my life tonight, Nayati said suddenly. Any man would have done the same. No, not any man, and not for an Apache. The old chief's eyes were distant, remembering. I have seen your people ride past dying Indians without slowing their horses. Elias stoked the fire, sending sparks spiraling up the chimney. I'm not responsible for other men's choices, but you are responsible for your own. Nayati struggled to sit up straighter, fighting the laudanum's pull. Among my people, a life debt is sacred. It cannot be ignored. You don't owe me anything, old man. Get well and go home. That's payment enough. You do not understand. I am war chief. My word is iron among the Chiricahua. If I say there is a debt, there is a debt. If I die without paying it, I will walk between worlds forever, never finding rest. Elias turned from the fire, studying the Apache's face. There was no deception there, no cunning, only the weight of absolute certainty. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that tomorrow I will send for my daughter. She will come to you, and she will serve in whatever way you require until the debt is paid." "Now hold on. It is done." Nayati's voice carried the finality of stone. "You saved a life. A life will serve you." The two men stared at each other across the flickering firelight. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and moaning through the eaves like lost souls. "I don't need a servant," Elias said finally. "Every man needs something. She will find what it is. And if I refuse—" Nayati's eyes glittered in the lamplight. "Then you dishonor me. You make my life worthless. Better you had let the wolf finish his meal." Elias poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey from a bottle on the mantel. Sarah's good whiskey, saved for special occasions that never seemed to come. The liquor burned going down, but it couldn't warm the cold knot in his gut. "Tell me about her," he said. "Sana is not my daughter by blood." Nayati began, his voice growing distant with memory. "I found her when she was 10 summers old, the only survivor of a Comanche raid on her village. Her family, her entire tribe dead. She was more animal than child when I took her in, wild with grief and rage." The old chief paused, pain flickering across his features, not from his wounds but from deeper hurts. "I raised her as Apache, taught her to hunt, to fight, to survive. She became one of our finest warriors, respected and feared by enemies and allies alike. But she is marked by tragedy. 3 times she has taken a husband. 3 times death has claimed them. The people whisper that she brings bad luck, that the spirits of her dead family will not let her find peace." Elias set down his glass harder than necessary. "Superstition. Perhaps, but superstition can kill as surely as a bullet, especially when it lives in the hearts of your own people. The tribal council voted. She must leave, find a new path, or face exile forever. And you're sending her to me. I am giving her a chance to rebuild her honor, to prove that she is not cursed, only unlucky. With you, she will be judged by her actions, not by whispers and fear." The fire settled lower, casting longer shadows across the room. Somewhere in those shadows, Elias could almost see Sarah's face, gentle, kind, forever young in his memory. What would she think of this strange turn of events? "How old is she?" he asked. 26 summers. Old for a woman without children, but she has seen much and survived more. She is not soft rancher. Life has made her hard as the desert stone. "And you think she'll be content cooking and cleaning for a stranger?" Nayati's laugh was dry as autumn leaves. "Sana has never cooked a meal in her life. She hunts, she fights, she watches the horizon for enemies, but she is Apache. She adapts, she survives. She will find her place." A coyote howled again, closer this time. Thunder nickered nervously in the corral, and Elias heard the soft sound of cattle lowing in the distance. Normal sounds of a working ranch, but tonight they seemed charged with portent. "When?" he asked. 3 suns from now she will come. I have sent word." Nayati's eyes were growing heavy with exhaustion and laudanum. "She will stay until the debt is paid, until honor is satisfied. Then she will choose her own path. And if we don't get along, then you will both learn patience." The old chief smiled, but there was steel beneath it. "She is my daughter in all ways that matter. Harm her, and I will come for you with fire and blade." "I don't hurt women." "No, I can see that you do not. It is why the spirits brought you to that canyon tonight, rancher. They knew you would do what needed doing." As Nayati drifted toward sleep, Elias sat staring into the dying fire. 3 days. In 3 days, his quiet, ordered life would be turned upside down by a woman he'd never met, a woman carrying the weight of tragedy and the expectations of honor. He thought of Sarah again, of the laughter they'd shared, and the children they'd never had. She would have welcomed this stranger with open arms, would have seen the adventure in it. But Sarah was 5 years in her grave, and Elias had grown comfortable with solitude. The wind moaned again, and for just a moment he could swear he heard Sarah's voice in it. Don't let fear make your choices, Eli. Some gifts come wrapped in thorns. Damn, he muttered, pouring another whiskey. Damn it all to hell. The next morning brought unseasonable heat for October, the kind that made the air shimmer like water over the desert floor. Elias woke early, as was his habit, and found Nayati already awake, sitting on the porch and watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold and rose. How's the leg? Elias asked, bringing coffee in 2 tin cups. It will heal. Nayati accepted the coffee gratefully. You stitch like an army surgeon. Was an army surgeon for a while. Scout too, before I took up ranching. Ah, that explains much. You move like a man who has seen war. They drank in companionable silence, watching the day wake up around them. A red-tailed hawk circled high overhead, riding the thermals with lazy grace. In the distance, cattle were already moving toward the waterhole, their bells jingling softly. Beautiful land, Nayati observed. Sarah thought so, said it looked like God's country. Your wife was wise. The spirits are strong here. I can feel them in the wind, in the stone. It is a good place to heal old wounds. Elias glanced at him. Is that what this is about, healing? Perhaps. Or perhaps it is about opening doors that have been closed too long. The old chief set down his cup and struggled to his feet. I must go. My people will be searching. You can barely walk. I can ride, and I have promises to keep. Elias helped him to Thunder, who stood patiently in the morning sun. The old warrior moved slowly but with determination, his leg obviously painful but functional. 3 days, Nayati said, settling carefully into the saddle. 3 days, Elias agreed. Her name is Sana. It means lightning in our tongue. Remember that, rancher. She may appear still water, but storms run deep in her blood. I'll remember. Nayati touched his heels to Thunder's sides, then paused. One more thing. She will test you as the desert tests all living things. She must know if you are strong enough to stand beside her when the winds of trouble blow. What kind of test? But the old chief was already riding away, leaving only dust and questions in his wake. For 3 days, Elias found himself preparing for he didn't know what. He cleaned the house from top to bottom, fixed the squeaky hinge on the spare bedroom door, and stocked up on supplies from town. Mrs. Henderson at the general store raised her eyebrows at his purchases. Extra coffee, dried beans, flour, salt pork, and ammunition. Expecting company, Mr. Halt? She asked, her voice loaded with curiosity. Might be, he replied, knowing the gossip would spread through Broken Mesa like wildfire. Let them talk. He'd learned long ago that small minds needed small things to occupy them. The 3rd day dawned clear and cool, with the kind of crystalline light that made every detail of the landscape stand out sharp as a photograph. Elias found himself checking the horizon constantly, looking for dust clouds or movement. By afternoon, his nerves were stretched tight as fence wire. She came at sunset. Elias was mending a bridle on the porch when he saw her, a distant figure on horseback, moving with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. As she drew closer, he could make out details: a paint horse, black and white, a rider sitting straight-backed and alert, dark hair streaming behind her like a war banner. His breath caught in his throat. Sana was not what he had expected. She was tall for a woman, nearly 6 feet, with the lean, powerful build of a warrior. Her hair was black as a moonless night and hung loose to her waist. Her skin was the color of burnished copper, and her face was a contradiction of beauty and hardness, grace and danger. She wore traditional Apache dress, buckskin tunic, and leggings, decorated with beadwork and silver conchos. A knife hung at her hip, and a rifle rested across her saddle, but it was her eyes that made Elias's chest tighten, with something between awe and apprehension. They were dark as winter storms and just as unpredictable. She stopped her horse 20 feet from the porch, studying him with the same intensity he was studying her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with assessment and wariness. "You are Elias Halt," she said finally. Her English was precise, touched with only the faintest accent. "I am. I am Sana, daughter of Nayati. I come to pay the debt my father owes." She dismounted in one fluid motion, moving with the controlled power of a mountain cat. Up close he could see the scars that marked her, a thin white line along her left temple, another across her knuckles, the puckered mark of an old bullet wound on her shoulder. They were warriors' marks, badges of survival in a harsh world. "Your father's leg is healing well, I take it," Elias said, finding his voice. "He will walk without limping within the moon. Your stitching was skilled." An awkward pause settled between them. What did you say to a woman who had come to repay a life debt? How did you welcome a stranger who might stay days or months? "Are you hungry?" he asked finally. Something that might have been amusement flickered in her dark eyes. "I am always hungry, but I did not come here to be fed like a pet. I came to work." "Then we'd better talk about what that means." He gestured toward the porch chairs, but she shook her head. "I do not sit while my debt remains unpaid. Tell me what you require and I will do it." Elias found himself at a loss. He'd been managing the ranch alone for years, handling everything from branding to bookkeeping. What could he possibly need that would satisfy the honor of a war chief's daughter? "I don't," he began, then stopped. Something in her posture, the set of her shoulders, the way her hand rested near her knife, told him she was expecting rejection, expecting him to send her away as others had done. "She will test you," Nayati had said. "She must know if you are strong enough to stand beside her when the winds of trouble blow." "The north pasture fence needs repair," he said finally. "Wires down in 3 places and the posts are rotting out. It's hard work in rough country." "I will do it." "It'll take a week, maybe more. You'd have to camp out there or ride back and forth each day." "I will camp." He studied her face, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. He found none. "You'll need supplies, food, tools, materials." "I need little." "Well, I need those cattle contained, so you'll take what I give you." He was surprised by the authority in his own voice. "We'll load the wagon tomorrow and ride out to assess the damage." She nodded once, sharp and definitive. "It will be done." "Good. Now about sleeping arrangements. I will make camp by the creek." "Like hell you will. There's a spare room in the house and that's where you'll sleep. I won't have Nayati thinking I made his daughter sleep on the ground." For the first time since her arrival, genuine surprise flickered across her features. "You would have me sleep under your roof. It's what civilized people do." "I am not civilized people." "No," he agreed. "But you're my guest, and guests sleep indoors." The silence that followed was different, somehow less wary, more thoughtful. She studied him with those storm-dark eyes, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. "Very well," she said at last, "but I keep my weapons." "Wouldn't expect otherwise." As the sun sank behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, Elias showed Sana to the spare room. It was small and simply furnished a bed, a dresser, a washstand. Sarah had always meant to do more with it, maybe turn it into a nursery someday. "There's water in the pitcher," he said awkwardly, "and clean towels in the dresser. Supper's at 7 if you want it." She set her saddlebags on the bed and turned to face him. In the lamplight, her scars stood out more prominently, telling stories of violence survived and battles won. "Why did you save him?" she asked suddenly. "Your father, yes, you could have ridden away. Many would have." Elias considered the question, really considered it. Why had he intervened? Why had he risked his life for a man he'd never met, a man whose people had killed settlers and soldiers without mercy? "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "The right thing." She tested the words just as Nayati had. "And what is the right thing for me to do now?" "Honor your father's debt, I suppose. Work hard, earn your keep, and find your own path when the time comes." "And if my path leads away from here?" Then it does. I'm not looking to cage anyone, Sana. Free is free. She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, almost vulnerable. I have never been free. Not truly. Always I have been bound by duty, by expectation, by the weight of what others think I should be. What do you want to be? I do not know, but perhaps I will find out. That night, as Elias lay in his own bed, listening to the familiar sounds of the ranch settling into sleep, he found himself acutely aware of the presence in the room down the hall. For the first time in 5 years, he wasn't alone in the house. It should have felt strange, unsettling. Instead, it felt right. Like a piece of the puzzle he hadn't known was missing had finally clicked into place. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere in that whisper, he could swear he heard Sarah's voice again. Some gifts come wrapped in thorns, Eli, but the sweetest fruit often does. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new complications. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Elias Holt fell asleep without the crushing weight of loneliness pressing down on his chest. In the room down the hall, Sana lay awake until well past midnight, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of her temporary refuge. The bed was soft, softer than anything she'd slept on in years. The roof was solid overhead, keeping out the stars she was used to sleeping under. It felt like luxury. It felt like safety. It felt like the first step toward something she couldn't yet name but desperately wanted to find. The debt would be paid, honor would be satisfied, and then she would choose. For perhaps the first time in her life, the choice would be entirely her own. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that the only way forward was to jump. The morning sun painted the ranch in shades of gold and amber, as Elias found Sana already awake, standing by the corral, watching his horses with the keen eye of someone who understood horseflesh. She'd changed from her ceremonial Apache dress into practical work clothes, denim pants that had seen better days, a cotton shirt the color of desert sand, and boots that looked like they'd walked 1,000 miles. "You're an early riser," he said, approaching with 2 cups of coffee steaming in the cool morning air. She accepted the cup without looking at him, her attention still fixed on the horses. "Sleep is a luxury warriors cannot afford. Old habits. You're not at war anymore. Am I not?" She turned those storm-dark eyes on him, and he saw depths there he hadn't noticed the night before. Every day is a battle when you carry the weight of other people's expectations. Thunder nickered softly from his stall, and Sana moved toward the big stallion with the fluid grace that seemed natural to her. The horse, normally skittish around strangers, stretched his neck over the rail to nuzzle her outstretched palm. "He remembers you," Elias observed. "Animals do not judge. They see only what is not what others say you should be." Her voice carried a bitter edge that spoke of painful experience. "It is a gift humans have forgotten." They loaded the wagon in comfortable silence, Elias piling in fence posts, rolls of wire tools and supplies, while Sana secured everything with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd packed for survival more times than she could count. Her movements were economical, precise, wasting no motion or energy. "You've done this before," he said, watching her knot the ropes with complex hitches that would hold through any storm. "I have done many things. Survival requires adaptation." The ride to the North Pasture took them through some of the most beautiful country in the territory, rolling hills covered with autumn grass that waved like wheat. In the morning breeze, stands of aspen trees, showing their first hints of gold, and always the mountains looming purple and mysterious in the distance. Elias found himself seeing it through fresh eyes, trying to imagine how it looked to someone raised in the harsh desert country of the Apache lands. "It's green here," Sana said suddenly, as if reading his thoughts. "Gets plenty of rain in the spring and early summer. Creek never runs dry even in the worst years." My father spoke truly. The spirits are strong in this place. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "It feels peaceful." That's why Sarah wanted to settle here. Said it was the kind of place where a person could put down roots and grow old watching the seasons change. But you did not grow old together. The simple statement hit him like a physical blow. No, we didn't get the chance. They rode in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was something about Sana's presence that didn't demand conversation. She existed in the moment, aware and alert, but not restless. It reminded him of hunting with his grandfather as a boy, learning to move through the forest without disturbing its natural rhythms. The damaged fence was worse than he'd remembered. 3 long sections were down completely, the wire tangled in rusty coils among the fallen posts. Cattle had wandered through, their hoofprints visible in the soft earth near the creek that formed the northern boundary of his land. "This will take more than a week," Sana said, surveying the destruction with a professional eye. "Probably. You sure you want to tackle it? It's back-breaking work, and some of those posts will have to be dug out with a pickaxe." She gave him a look that could have melted steel. "I am Apache. We do not fear hard work." Didn't mean to imply. Yes, you did. You think because I am a woman, I cannot handle a man's labor. Her voice was controlled, but he could hear the anger simmering beneath the surface. How many women have you known who could track a war party for 50 miles through desert that would kill most men? How many could put an arrow through a man's heart at 100 paces while riding bareback on a running horse? Elias held up his hands in surrender. "Point taken, I apologize." She studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity. Whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded once and turned back to the fence. "I will need a camp here," she said, pointing to a spot near the creek where a stand of cottonwoods would provide shelter from the wind. "And I will work alone." "Like hell you will. This is a 2-man job at minimum." "I work alone. Not on my land you don't." "What if you get hurt? What if a post falls on you, or you cut yourself on the wire? How would I explain to Nayati that his daughter died because I was too proud to help?" For a moment he thought she might argue. Her jaw tightened and her hand moved instinctively toward the knife at her hip. But then something shifted in her expression, and she gave a slight nod. "You may help, but I lead this work. It is my debt to pay." "Agreed." They set up camp as the sun climbed toward its zenith, Sana choosing the perfect spot with an eye for defense that spoke of hard-earned experience. Water nearby, but not so close that enemies could use the creek for silent approach. Clear lines of sight in all directions. Easy escape routes if things went wrong. "You're thinking like someone who expects trouble," Elias observed, watching her arrange their supplies. "Trouble finds me whether I expect it or not. Better to be prepared." As they worked through the afternoon, Elias began to understand why Nayati had spoken of his daughter with such pride and pain. Sana attacked the damaged fence with a fierce determination that bordered on fury, as if she were fighting demons only she could see. She wielded the pickaxe like a weapon, driving it into the hard-packed earth around the old posts with savage precision. "Easy," he said, after watching her work herself into a lather, trying to free a particularly stubborn post. "It's not going anywhere. It stands between me and my goal." She panted, sweat streaming down her face despite the cool air. "I do not accept obstacles. Sometimes you have to work around them instead of through them." She straightened, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. "And sometimes the only way forward is to break what stands in your path." There was something in her voice, a pain that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Elias set down his shovel and really looked at her, not at the strong shoulders and capable hands, but at the woman beneath the warrior's facade. "What are you really fighting, Sana?" The question hung in the air between them like smoke from a distant fire. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer. Then her shoulders sagged slightly. and some of the rigid control left her posture. "Myself," she said simply. "I am fighting myself." Before he could respond, she turned back to the post and resumed her assault on the stubborn earth. But the fury was gone, now replaced by something more sustainable, steady determination instead of desperate rage. They worked until the sun touched the western hills, making good progress but nowhere near finishing. As the light faded, they built a fire near the creek and settled down to a simple meal of bacon beans and coffee. The flames danced between them, casting shifting shadows on their faces and pushing back the encroaching darkness. "Tell me about your wife," Sana said suddenly. Elias nearly choked on his coffee. It wasn't a question he'd expected, and certainly not from her. "Why, because you speak of her like she was the sun, and when she died your world went dark. I wish to understand what that feels like." He was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire and seeing Sarah's face in the dancing flames, golden hair that caught sunlight like spun silk, blue eyes that could sparkle with laughter one moment and flash with righteous anger the next, hands that were gentle with hurt animals and firm when teaching children their letters. "Her name was Sarah Elizabeth Mackenzie when I met her," he said finally. "She was teaching school in Fort Stockton, trying to bring some civilization to the frontier. I was scouting for the cavalry then, and I came into town all dust and leather and attitude. And she tamed you." "Lord, no. Sarah never tried to tame anybody, but she saw something in me worth saving, something I'd forgotten was there." He took a sip of coffee, remembering. She was beautiful, but that wasn't what caught me. Plenty of beautiful women in the world. It was her spirit. She had this way of making you believe you could be better than you were. "How did she die?" The question was asked quietly without prying curiosity, and somehow that made it easier to answer. "Fever. Came on sudden one winter when the snow was too deep to get to town for the doctor. I tried everything I knew, but—" He shrugged the gesture, carrying 5 years of grief and guilt. I held her hand while she slipped away. Last thing she said was that she wasn't afraid because she knew I'd be all right. "But you were not all right." "No, I haven't been all right since." Sana was quiet for a long moment, studying the fire with those dark, unreadable eyes. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than he'd yet heard it. "I was married once. 3 times, actually." Elias looked up, surprised by the admission. "My first husband was a warrior named Mangas, strong, brave kind. We were happy for 2 winters, and I thought perhaps the spirits had forgiven me for surviving when my birth family died. Then he was killed in a raid against the Mexican settlements, shot through the heart by a vaquero's rifle." She picked up a stick and poked at the fire, sending sparks spiraling into the star-filled sky. "The second was Cochise's nephew Naalnish. The marriage was arranged to strengthen bonds between bands. He was a good man, patient with my grief, understanding of my warrior's spirit, but the soldiers came to his camp while he slept. They butchered everyone, men, women, children. I was hunting in the mountains and returned to find only bodies and ashes." Elias felt his chest tighten with sympathy and horror. Jesus. "The third was my choice alone. Takota, a war chief from another band. We married for love, and for a season I believed the curse was broken. But love could not stop the smallpox that swept through the camps. I watched him die by inches, his body betraying him, while his spirit fought to stay. I could heal his wounds, but not his sickness." The fire crackled and popped, the only sound for a long minute. After that, the people began to whisper. 3 husbands dead, and always Sana survived. They said I was cursed, that death followed me like a hungry wolf. The tribal council decided I brought bad luck to any man foolish enough to love me. That's superstition. You know that. Do I? She looked at him across the fire, and he saw raw pain in her eyes. 3 good men dead, because they chose to bind their lives to mine. How do you explain such consistent tragedy? Life, Elias said firmly. Hard, unfair, brutal life. Sarah died, and I could have blamed God or fate or my own failures as a husband. Instead, I blamed myself for not being able to save her. but that doesn't make me cursed, it just makes me human. Perhaps, but the council's judgment stands. I am exiled until I can prove that I am not a harbinger of death. She gave him a look that was both challenging and vulnerable. Is that not why you hesitate to accept my help? Why you watch me as if I might bring misfortune to your peaceful ranch? The accusation stung because there was truth in it. He had been wary not because he believed in Apache superstitions, but because he'd grown comfortable with his controlled, predictable solitude. Sana represented change, complication, the possibility of caring about another human being, and with caring came the risk of loss. Maybe at first, he admitted, but not because I think you're cursed, because I think you're dangerous. Dangerous, how? You make a man want to step outside his safe little world, want to take risks again, feel things again. He met her eyes across the dancing flames. That's terrifying when you've spent 5 years building walls to keep the herd out. Sana studied his face in the firelight, and for the first time since her arrival, she seemed to truly see him not as an obligation to be discharged or a debt to be paid, but as a man carrying his own wounds. Perhaps, she said slowly, we are both running from the same enemy, which is hope, the possibility that we might find something worth fighting for again. The words hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Instead, they finished their meal in contemplative silence, each lost in thoughts too complex for easy expression. As they prepared for sleep, Sana spread her bedroll by the dying fire, while Elias arranged his on the opposite side. The distance between them felt both necessary and arbitrary, close enough for warmth and protection, far enough to maintain the careful boundaries they'd established. Elias, she said, as he settled into his blankets. Yeah, thank you. For what? For not sending me away when you learned the truth about my husbands. Many men would have. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the night sounds around them, the soft murmur of the creek, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods, the distant call of a night bird. I told you before I'm not responsible for other men's choices. Besides, seems to me you've paid a heavy enough price for whatever sins you think you're carrying. And you, what price have you paid? Loneliness. 5 years of it deep enough to drown in. Perhaps it is time to swim for the surface. Perhaps. The next few days fell into a rhythm as natural as breathing. They rose with the sun, worked until the heat became unbearable, rested during the blazing afternoon hours, then returned to their labor as the air cooled toward evening. Slowly, steadily, the fence began to take shape again. Elias found himself constantly surprised by Sana's capabilities. She handled the heavy posts as easily as he did, her lean frame hiding a strength born of years, surviving in harsh country. More than that, she had an instinctive understanding of the work that went beyond mere physical ability. She could look at a damaged section and immediately see the most efficient way to repair it, could judge the proper depth for a post hole by the soil composition and drainage patterns. You've done this before, he said on the 3rd day, watching her set a post with the skill of a veteran rancher. I have watched. When the Apache made peace with the army, some of our people went to work for white ranchers. I learned much during those times of truce. But you never worked yourself. I was a war chief's daughter. My place was with the warriors, not mending fences. She paused in her work, wiping sweat from her brow. But I have always been curious about the ways of your people, how you bend the land to your will instead of learning to live within its rhythms. And what do you think of our ways? She considered the question seriously, looking out over the pasture where his cattle grazed in peaceful contentment. There is wisdom in it, security, prosperity, the ability to plan for seasons beyond the next hunt. But there is loss, too. You fence off the land, claim it as yours alone, forget that it existed long before you came and will remain long after you are dust. But you're helping me rebuild those fences. I am paying a debt. That does not mean I agree with all I do. Her honesty was refreshing in its directness. Most people, especially women, felt compelled to soften their opinions to make them more palatable to male sensibilities. Sana spoke her mind without apology or qualification. "What would you do differently?" he asked. "I would ask the land's permission before changing it. I would leave corridors for the wild things to move freely. I would remember that ownership is temporary, but stewardship is forever." That evening, as they sat by their fire sharing another simple meal, Elias found himself telling her things he'd never spoken aloud before. About his childhood in Missouri, growing up on his father's hard-scrabble farm, about the war that had taken his older brother and sent him west, seeking something he couldn't name, about the years of scouting and fighting and wandering before Sarah had given his life direction and meaning. In return, Sana shared fragments of her own story. Her earliest memories of the massacre that had orphaned her, the kindness of Nayati's wife in taking in a traumatized child, the long process of learning to be Apache while never quite forgetting what she'd lost. "Do you remember your birth family?" he asked. "Pieces. My mother's voice singing lullabies, my father's hands teaching me to weave grass into baskets, the smell of our cook fire and the way sunlight looked through the smoke hole in our wickiup." Her voice grew distant. "Sometimes I dream of them, and for a moment after I wake I forget they are gone." "That's not forgetting, that's honoring their memory. The Apache way is to speak no more of the dead, lest you call their spirits back to wander between worlds. But I have never been able to let them go completely. Maybe you're not supposed to. Maybe carrying them with you is what keeps them alive." She looked at him across the fire, and he saw something shift in her expression, a softening, a lowering of defenses he hadn't realized she still maintained. "You speak wisdom for a man who claims to know nothing of spirits. I know grief. That's close enough." By the end of the first week, they had made remarkable progress on the fence, but more than that, they had begun to find an easy companionship that surprised them both. Their conversations ranged from practical matters of ranching and land management to deeper topics of philosophy and belief. Sana had a sharp mind behind her warrior's facade, curious about everything from astronomy to literature to the complex politics of territorial governance. "You can read," Elias observed one evening, watching her study a book of poetry he'd brought from the house. "Nayati insisted I learn. He said knowledge was a weapon that could never be taken away, even by death." She turned a page carefully, her scarred fingers gentle with the delicate paper. "Your wife marked passages in this book." He looked at the slim volume in her hands. Tennyson's works, one of Sarah's favorites. She'd often read aloud to him in the evenings, her voice bringing the words to life in ways that made him understand why people called poetry an art. She loved that one, used to say it helped her make sense of the world. Sana read silently for a moment, then spoke aloud, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." She looked up at him. "Do you believe that?" The question caught him off guard. Did he believe it? Would he trade the 5 happy years with Sarah to avoid the 5 years of grief that had followed? "I don't know," he said honestly. "Ask me again when the pain isn't so fresh. It has been 5 years. How long does fresh last?" He had no answer for that. On the 8th day, as they were setting the final posts for the first long section, of fence riders appeared on the horizon. Elias shaded his eyes against the morning sun, counting silhouettes, 4 men on horseback moving with purpose toward their work site. "Trouble?" Sana asked, following his gaze. "Could be. Best get your rifle." She was already moving, her warrior's instincts engaged. Within seconds, she had her Winchester in her hands and was scanning the approaching riders with the cold assessment of someone who'd faced enemies before. As the men drew closer, Elias recognized them, Jim Bradley and his sons from the neighboring ranch, along with Sheriff Morrison from Broken Mesa. Not enemies, but not necessarily friends either. Bradley had always resented Elias's superior water rights and better grazing land. "Halt!" Bradley called out when they were within shouting distance. "We need to talk." Elias stepped forward, his own rifle held casually but ready. "Morning, Jim. Sheriff, what brings you boys out this way?" Bradley was a big man gone to fat, with the red face and choleric temperament of someone accustomed to getting his way through bluster and intimidation. His 3 sons were cut from the same cloth, loud, crude, and quick to take offense. "Heard you got yourself a squaw," Bradley said, his voice heavy with contempt. "Figured we'd come see for ourselves." The words hit the morning air like a slap. Elias felt his jaw tighten, and beside him Sana went utterly still, in the way a rattlesnake coils before striking. "You'd better watch your mouth, Jim," Elias said quietly, "or what you'll sick your Apache whore on us." The eldest Bradley son, Tom, spat into the dust for emphasis. That was the wrong thing to say. Sana moved faster than thought, covering the 20 feet between them in 3 silent strides. Her rifle muzzle came up to rest against Tom Bradley's throat before he could even reach for his gun. "Speak those words again," she said in a voice like winter wind, "and they will be the last words you ever speak." Tom Bradley's face went white as bone, his Adam's apple bobbing against the cold steel of Sana's rifle barrel. The other men reached for their weapons but froze when they saw the deadly calm in her storm-dark eyes. This wasn't anger, it was the cold promise of violence from someone who had killed before and would kill again without hesitation. "Easy now," Sheriff Morrison said, his voice carefully neutral. He was a weathered man in his 50s, gray-bearded and cautious, who'd survived frontier law enforcement by knowing when to push and when to step back. "Nobody needs to die over harsh words." "Some words deserve death," Sana replied without moving the rifle. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, and everyone present knew she could put a bullet through Tom's throat faster than he could blink. "Sana!" Elias's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Step back." She didn't move, didn't even look at him. Her entire focus was on the man whose life balanced on the edge of her decision. "Step back," Elias repeated, moving closer. "Please." For a heartbeat that stretched into eternity, nobody breathed. Then Sana lowered her rifle with the same fluid grace she'd raised it, stepping backward until she stood beside Elias again. But her eyes never left Tom Bradley's face, and the message in them was clear: next time there would be no reprieve. "Jesus Christ," Tom gasped, rubbing his throat where the rifle had pressed against skin. "She's crazy as a rabid wolf." "She's a guest on my land," Elias said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "And anyone who insults my guests answers to me." Jim Bradley's red face got redder. "Guest hell, halt. Everybody knows she's your Apache whore. Whole territories talking about it." The silence that followed was deafening. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark sang its liquid song, oblivious to the human drama playing out beneath the morning sun. A hot wind stirred the grass, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. "I'll ask you once to apologize," Elias said quietly. "Just once." "Like hell I will. You got no right bringing savages onto decent land, corrupting." Elias hit him. The punch came without warning, a straight right hand that caught Bradley flush on the jaw and sent him tumbling backward into the dirt. The big man rolled once and lay still, blood trickling from his split lip. "Jesus, Pa." The youngest Bradley boy, maybe 18 and full of foolish courage, went for his gun. Sana's rifle snapped up again, this time centering on his chest. "Do not!" The boy froze his hand halfway to his holster. In that frozen moment, Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his own weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. "That's enough," he said firmly. "All of you. Jim, you and your boys mount up and ride out now." "Like hell," Bradley snarled, wiping blood from his mouth as he struggled to his feet. "I ain't done with this son of a bitch." "Yes, you are." Morrison's voice carried the full weight of his badge. "You came onto his land looking for trouble, insulted his guest, and got what you deserved. Push it further and I'll arrest the lot of you for disturbing the peace." "What about her?" Tom pointed at Sana with a shaking finger. "She threatened to kill me. After you called her names, that would make a mule skinner blush. Far as I'm concerned, she showed remarkable restraint." Morrison turned to face the Bradleys fully. "Get off this land before I decide to run you in anyway." The four men mounted their horses with ill grace, Jim Bradley glaring at Elias with naked hatred. "This ain't over, halt," he called as they prepared to leave. "Decent folk won't stand for this kind of carrying on. You'll see." "I'll be here when you work up the nerve to come back," Elias replied evenly. After they rode away, trailing dust and curses, Sheriff Morrison turned to face Elias and Sana. His expression was troubled but not unsympathetic. "You know this is going to cause problems," he said. "Already has, apparently. I mean real problems. Bradley's got friends and they're all cut from the same cloth. They start talking in the saloon, spreading stories, working folks up." Morrison shook his head. "Could get ugly fast." "Let it get ugly. I'm not running anyone off my land because small minds can't handle what they don't understand." The sheriff studied Sana, who had lowered her rifle but kept it ready. "You're Nayati's daughter, aren't you? The one they call Lightning." "I am." "Heard stories about you, most of them involving dead men." "Most of them true." Morrison nodded slowly. "Thought so. You planning to stay here long?" "Until my debt is paid." "And how long might that be?" Sana glanced at Elias, something unreadable passing between them. "I do not know." "Well," Morrison said, settling his hat more firmly on his head, "I'd advise you both to be careful. Feelings are running high in town, and not just about Apache. There's talk of statehood coming, of bringing civilization to the territory. Some folks see your arrangement as a step backward." "Some folks need to mind their own business," Elias said. "Maybe so, but they won't." Morrison gathered his reins, preparing to leave. "Watch yourselves, both of you." After the sheriff rode away, Elias and Sana stood in the sudden quiet, the morning's confrontation hanging between them like smoke from a dying fire. "You did not have to defend my honor," she said finally. "Yes, I did." "Why?" He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not the Apache warrior, or the exile, or the woman paying her father's debt, but simply Sana, strong, proud, wounded, and trying to find her place in a world that seemed determined to reject her. "Because it's the right thing to do," he said. That simple phrase, the same one he'd used to explain why he'd saved Nayati, seemed to unlock something in her. Her shoulders, always held rigid with warrior's discipline, relaxed slightly. Her dark eyes softened, showing glimpses of the woman behind the armor. "You realize what this means?" she said quietly. "You have taken my side against your own people. There will be consequences." "Let there be consequences. I stopped caring what other people thought when Sarah died." "But I care." The admission seemed to surprise her. "I care what happens to you because of me." "Then don't leave." The words were out before he could stop them, hanging in the air between them, like a bridge waiting to be crossed or burned. "What? Don't leave when the debt is paid. Stay, help me run this place. Be my partner, not my servant." She stared at him, emotions warring across her face. Hope, fear, longing, uncertainty, all flickering like flames in a changing wind. "You do not know what you are asking." "I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to take a chance on something neither of us expected. I'm asking you to stop running from the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could build something good together." "I am cursed. Remember, death follows where I go." "Then maybe it's time to face death down instead of running from it." He stepped closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in her dark eyes. "Maybe it's time for both of us to stop being afraid of living." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she turned away, walking toward the half-finished fence with her characteristic fluid stride. "The debt is not yet paid," she said without looking back. "We will speak of this when honor is satisfied." But something had changed between them. Elias felt it in the way she moved, heard it in the careful neutrality of her voice. The walls were still there, but cracks had appeared. Light was beginning to seep through. They worked the rest of the day in charged silence, each acutely aware of the other's presence. When their hands touched passing tools, when their shoulders brushed, working in close quarters, when their eyes met across the worksite, every contact carried the weight of unspoken possibilities. That evening they made camp as usual, but the familiar routines felt different now. The distance between their bedrolls seemed both vast and insignificant. The fire that had been a comfortable focal point now felt like a barrier keeping them on opposite sides of something neither quite dared to cross. "Tell me about your dreams," Sana said suddenly as they sat watching the flames dance against the darkness. "My dreams, what you wanted before Sarah died, what you planned for this place, this life." Elias poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the star-filled sky. It had been years since anyone had asked him about his dreams. He'd buried them so deep he'd almost forgotten they existed. "We wanted children," he said finally. "Sarah said this valley was too beautiful not to fill with the sound of young voices. We planned to build a bigger house, maybe start a school for the ranch kids in the area. She had this idea about planting fruit trees, creating a real orchard instead of just the wild ones that grow along the creek. And after she died, dreams felt like luxuries I couldn't afford. I just focused on surviving one day at a time." Sana was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire as if she could read the future in the dancing flames. "I dreamed once of having children," she said softly. "With my first husband, Mangas. We would lie together under the stars and plan the names we would give our sons and daughters. We spoke of teaching them to hunt, to ride, to carry themselves with Apache pride. What happened to those dreams? They died with him, and again with Na'alnish, and again with Takota." Her voice carried the weight of accumulated grief. "After the third time I stopped dreaming. Dreams hurt too much when they die. Maybe it's time to start dreaming again." She looked at him across the fire, and he saw something vulnerable and fragile in her eyes, hope carefully guarded but undeniably present. "What would we dream of you and I?" The question hung between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I think we could figure it out together." Together. She tested the word like she was tasting something exotic and potentially poisonous. "I have not been part of a together in many years." "Neither have I. Might be time to learn again." That night, as they settled into their bedrolls on opposite sides of the dying fire, Elias found himself acutely aware of every sound she made. The rustle of blankets as she arranged herself for sleep, the soft sigh as she settled into comfort, the steady rhythm of her breathing as she drifted toward dreams. For the first time in 5 years, he fell asleep thinking not about the past, but about the future. The next morning brought unexpected visitors of a different sort. Elias was splitting kindling for their breakfast fire when he heard horses approaching from the south, multiple riders moving at a steady but unhurried pace. He looked up to see Sana already alert, her rifle in her hands, and her eyes scanning the tree line for potential threats. "More trouble?" he asked. "Perhaps. These ride differently than the others, like warriors, not angry farmers." As the riders emerged from the morning mist that hung over the creek, Elias saw she was right. 6 Apache warriors mounted on paint ponies and moving with the fluid grace of men born to the saddle. They wore traditional dress, buckskin and beads, eagle feathers and war paint. Their faces were hard as carved stone. At their head rode a man Elias recognized from descriptions, Geronimo's Lieutenant Chato, a war chief whose name was spoken in whispers throughout the territory. Beside him rode a younger warrior with Sana's eyes and Nayati's proud bearing. "My brother," Sana said quietly, her knuckles white where they gripped her rifle. "Your brother, Kestrel, Nayati's blood son. He has come to bring me home." The war party stopped 50 yards away, close enough to talk, but far enough to avoid immediate conflict. Chato raised his right hand in a gesture that was part greeting, part challenge. "Sana, daughter of Nayati," he called in English, accented but clear. "You are summoned to return." "By whose authority?" she replied, stepping forward, but keeping her rifle ready. "By mine, by the council, by the spirits of our ancestors who weep to see a warrior daughter living as servant to the white man." Kestrel nudged his horse closer, his young face tight with emotion. "Sister, you bring shame upon our father's name. Come home before more damage is done." "This is my home now," Sana said firmly. "My debt is not yet paid." "Your debt?" Chato's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "You owe nothing to this American. You are Apache. Your duty is to your people, not to some lonely rancher who uses you to warm his bed." Elias felt his temper flare, but before he could speak, Sana's voice cut through the morning air like a blade. "Speak carefully, Chato. Your words carry the weight of accusation without proof." "What proof do I need? You live under his roof, work his land, sleep by his fire. The whole territory speaks of the Apache woman who has forgotten her pride." "I have forgotten nothing." Sana's voice was steady, but Elias could see the tension in her shoulders, the careful control that held her warrior's fury in check. "I pay an honorable debt in an honorable way. If others choose to see shame where none exists, that speaks to their hearts, not mine." Kestrel dismounted, approaching his sister with careful steps. He was younger than her by several years, but carried himself with the dignity of a proven warrior. When he spoke, his voice carried genuine pain. "Sana, I have watched our father age 10 years since you left. He believes he sent you to your doom, traded his daughter's honor for his own life. Come home and let us find another way to satisfy this debt." For the first time since the warriors arrived, uncertainty flickered across Sana's face. The pain in her brother's voice, the weight of her father's guilt, these were weapons against which her rifle offered no defense. "Another way?" she asked. "Horses," Chato said promptly. "Cattle, gold taken from white men's wagons. Any of these would pay the debt 100-fold. And what of my exile? What of the council's judgment that I bring death to any man who loves me? The council can be persuaded to reconsider. You have been gone long enough for cooler heads to prevail. Return now, and we will speak no more of curses or bad luck." Elias watched this exchange with growing alarm, not because he feared losing a worker or a companion, but because he could see the war being fought in Sana's heart. The pull of family, of belonging, of a place where she would never have to explain who she was or justify her existence. It was powerful medicine against the uncertain promise of a life among strangers. "You would have me abandon my word?" she asked quietly. "I would have you remember who you are," Chato replied. "You are lightning, daughter of the great war chief Nayati, sister to warriors, child of the wind and storm. You do not belong here tending another man's fences like a common laborer." "And yet," Elias said, speaking for the first time since the warriors arrived, "she has done more in 2 weeks to restore this ranch than I accomplished in months alone. Her work is worthy of respect, not shame." Chato turned his hard gaze on the rancher, and Elias felt the weight of centuries of conflict, mistrust, and violence in that stare. "You speak American, but your words are hollow. You keep our daughter as a curiosity, a tame Apache to prove your own virtue. When you tire of the novelty, you will cast her aside like a broken tool." "No," Elias said simply, "I won't." "Pretty words, but what proof do you offer?" Elias looked at Sana, standing straight and proud between two worlds, belonging fully to neither. In that moment he made a choice that would echo through the rest of his life. "I offer my name," he said clearly. "I offer marriage if she'll have me. Not as payment for debt, but as recognition of worth. Not as master to servant, but as equal to equal." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the morning breeze seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the response that would shape all their futures. Sana stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. "What did you say?" "I said, I'm asking you to marry me, to be my wife, not my debt servant, to build something together that belongs to both of us." "You are serious, dead serious." Chato's face darkened with rage. You dare make mock of sacred Apache customs with your white man's proposals." "I dare offer her what she's never had," Elias shot back. "A choice that's entirely her own, made without pressure from family or council or anyone else. A chance to decide her own fate." Kestrel looked between his sister and the rancher, confusion and concern warring on his young face. "Sana, surely you cannot consider this madness. You belong with your people." "Do I?" she asked quietly. "With people who whisper that I am cursed, who exile me for surviving when others died, who come here speaking of honor while offering to buy me back like a stolen horse." "That is not," Kestrel began. "It is exactly what you are doing." Sana's voice was growing stronger, more certain. "You speak of my shame, but where was the tribal honor when I was cast out? You speak of my duty to our people, but where was their duty to me when I needed them most?" Chato's hand moved to his war hatchet. "You speak dangerous words, daughter of Nayati. I speak true words. The only danger is to comfortable lies." She turned to face the war chief directly. "I have served my father's honor faithfully. I have worked without complaint, asked for nothing but the chance to prove my worth. And now when someone offers to value that worth, you would have me refuse out of loyalty to people who showed me no loyalty in return." "Answer me this," Elias said, stepping closer to her. "Not as payment of debt, not as Apache duty or white man's convenience. What does Sana want? What does your heart tell you?" She looked at him with those storm-dark eyes, and for a moment he saw past all her defenses to the woman beneath, frightened, hopeful, wounded, but still capable of courage. "My heart tells me," she said slowly, "that I have been running from happiness so long I have forgotten what it looks like. My heart tells me that maybe, just maybe, it is time to stop running." She turned back to face her brother and the war party, her shoulders set with decision. "Tell our father that his debt is paid in full. His daughter has found her place, and it is here with a man who values her strength rather than fearing it. Tell the council that their exile is complete. I choose to remain apart, but not in shame, in hope." Chato's face was stone, but Kestrel's showed genuine anguish. "Sister, if you do this thing, there can be no returning. The breach will be complete." "I know. Our father will never forgive himself." "Then perhaps it is time for our father to learn that some debts cannot be paid by sacrificing daughters." Her voice softened slightly. "Tell him I am happy, brother. Tell him his lightning has found her storm." The young warrior looked as if he wanted to argue further, but Chato raised a hand to stop him. "It is done," the war chief said with finality. "You have chosen your path, daughter of Nayati. May you find at its end what you seek." He wheeled his horse around, signaling the others to follow. But Kestrel lingered, looking back at his sister with eyes that held equal parts love and loss. "If you change your mind," he began, "I will not. But if you do, you will always be welcome at my fire. No matter what the council says, you are my sister, and that bond cannot be broken." With that, he rode away, leaving Sana and Elias alone in the morning stillness. For a long moment, neither spoke. The weight of what had just transpired hung between them. The bridge burned. The choice made the future suddenly tangible and terrifying. "So," Elias said finally, "that happened. It did. Any regrets?" She considered the question seriously, her eyes tracking the dust cloud left by the departing war party. "Ask me in a year," she said, "when I know if this courage or foolishness." "Fair enough." He moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "For what it's worth, I think it's courage. And what if I prove to be the cursed woman they believe me to be? What if loving me brings you only sorrow?" Then I'll face that sorrow when it comes, but I won't let fear of what might happen steal what's happening right now." She turned to face him fully, and for the first time since he'd known her, her expression was completely open. No walls, no defenses, just Nina in all her complex, contradictory humanity. "I do not know how to be a wife," she said quietly. "I don't know how to be a husband anymore. Guess we'll figure it out together." Together. She smiled then, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. "I like the sound of that word." "Good," he said, reaching out to take her scarred hands in his calloused ones, "because you're going to be hearing it a lot." As they stood there in the morning sun, hands clasped and futures intertwined, the mountains around them seemed to sing with approval. Somewhere in the distance, a meadowlark called its liquid song of joy, and for the first time in years, both Elias and Sana dared to believe that happiness might not be just a memory or a dream, but a possibility worth fighting for. The fence could wait. They had more important foundations to build. The ride back to the ranch house felt different than any journey Elias had ever taken. Sana rode beside him on her paint horse, no longer the exile paying her father's debt, but a woman who had chosen her own destiny. The afternoon sun caught the silver conchos on her belt, sending flashes of light dancing across the sage grass like scattered stars. "We should go to town," he said as they topped the rise that gave them their first view of the valley spread out below. "Make this official before word gets out and folks start talking more than they already are." "Official how?" "Marriage license, preacher, witnesses who can swear we did this legal and proper." He glanced at her, suddenly uncertain. "Unless you'd prefer Apache customs." Sana was quiet for a moment, considering. "I was married 3 times by Apache law. Perhaps it is time to try the white man's way. And if that doesn't work either, then we will know that marriage itself is cursed, not just me." Her dry humor surprised him, drawing a chuckle from his chest. It felt good to laugh, felt like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. "Fair enough, though I should warn you, Broken Mesa isn't exactly friendly territory right now. The Bradleys will have been talking, spreading their poison. Some folks might not be too welcoming. Let them try to stop us. I have faced Apache war parties and Mexican soldiers. I do not fear the disapproval of shopkeepers and farmers." The confidence in her voice was absolute, but Elias caught something else underneath a thread of uncertainty that spoke to deeper fears. She might not fear their disapproval, but she cared about it more than she wanted to admit. As they rode down into the valley, thunder's hooves marking a steady rhythm on the packed earth, Elias found himself seeing his land through her eyes, the creek meandering silver through the grass, the cattle scattered like brown pearls across the pasture, the house sitting solid and welcoming in its grove of cottonwoods. It was beautiful country, peaceful country, the kind of place where a man could put down roots and grow old watching the seasons change. But would it be enough for a woman raised under open skies, accustomed to the freedom of endless horizons? "What are you thinking?" she asked, and he realized she'd been watching him watch the land. "Wondering if you'll be happy here. It's not much compared to what you're used to." "What I am used to is exile and judgment. This land offers something I have never had the chance to belong somewhere by choice rather than birth or circumstance." She paused, then added quietly, "Do not mistake me for some wild creature who cannot adapt to captivity. I choose this cage because it comes with a key." That evening they made their preparations with the methodical care of people who understood the weight of what they were undertaking. Sana mended her best dress, a beautiful creation of soft deerskin decorated with intricate beadwork that caught the lamplight like captured fire. Elias cleaned and pressed his one good suit, the black wool Sarah had insisted he buy, for church and funerals now destined for a wedding he'd never expected to have. "Tell me about the ceremony," Sana said, as she worked careful stitches in a torn seam. "What will be expected of me?" "Not much. Preacher asks if you take me for your husband. You say yes. He asks if I take you for my wife. I say yes, and then we're married. Simple as that. And after, what changes? The question caught him off guard. What would change everything, he supposed, though he hadn't thought it through carefully? You'd have legal standing as my wife, right to property, right to make decisions if something happened to me, protection under territorial law. He paused, considering, and I suppose folks would have to call you Mrs. Halt instead of that Apache woman. Mrs. Halt. She tested the name, rolling it around her tongue like she was tasting something foreign. It sounds permanent. That's the idea. And if we find we do not suit, if the curse proves true and misfortune follows. Elias set down the boot he'd been polishing and looked at her directly. Then we'll face whatever comes together. That's what marriage means, not running when things get hard. Even if I prove to be death to any man who loves me, especially then. She was quiet for a long time after that, her fingers working the needle through soft leather with practiced precision. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. I have been alone so long, I have forgotten how to be part of something larger than myself. We'll learn together. Together, that word again spoken like a prayer or a promise. They rode into Broken Mesa the next morning, arriving just as the town was shaking off sleep and settling into the routines of another day. Elias felt the eyes on them, immediately curious, hostile, calculating. Word of their arrangement had indeed spread, and the reactions were about what he'd expected. Mrs. Henderson stood in the doorway of her general store, arms crossed and mouth pursed in disapproval. Tom Bradley leaned against the hitching post outside the saloon, his neck still bearing the faint mark where Sana's rifle had pressed against his throat. A group of women gathered near the church stepped back as they passed, whispering behind gloved hands. Friendly place, Sana observed dryly. Give them time, they'll come around. Will they, or will they simply learn to hide their hatred better? Elias had no answer for that. The territorial office was a small building wedged between the bank and the barber shop, presided over by a nervous clerk named Philip Morse, who'd come west with dreams of adventure and discovered mostly paperwork and petty politics. He looked up as they entered, his pale eyes widening when he saw Sana. "Mr. Halt," he stammered. "What can I do for you? Need a marriage license, Philip?" The clerk's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. "A marriage license for you and for me and Miss Sana, daughter of Nayati. She's going to be my wife." "Your wife. I see. Well, that is most—" Philip reached for the proper forms with shaking hands. "There are procedures, you understand. Requirements, blood tests, and waiting periods, and—" "Philip." Elias's voice carried just enough edge to cut through the bureaucratic stammering. "I've been paying taxes in this territory for 7 years. I own land, I employ workers, I contribute to the local economy. Are you telling me I don't have the right to marry whoever I choose?" "No, sir. No, of course not. It's just unusual circumstances require. That is to say—" "What my colleague is trying to explain," came a new voice from the doorway, "is that territorial law requires certain assurances when the union involves different populations." They turned to see Judge Harrison Blackwood entering the office, his black robes rustling with authority. Blackwood was a political appointee from back east, a man who viewed the frontier as a stepping stone to higher office rather than a home to be cherished. "Judge," Elias said carefully, "didn't expect to see you here. Word travels fast in a small town, Mr. Halt. I thought it prudent to ensure all legal requirements are properly met." Blackwood's pale eyes fixed on Sana with undisguised distaste. "We wouldn't want any irregularities that might invalidate the union later." "What kind of irregularities?" "Well, for instance, we need assurance that the female party enters this union willingly, without coercion from tribal authorities or debt obligations that might compromise her judgment." Sana stepped forward, her voice steady and clear. "I am Sana, daughter of Nayati. I speak for myself, judge my own circumstances, and make my own choices. No one coerces me to do anything. And yet you came here to pay your father's debt, did you not? Living as a servant in Mr. Halt's house, subject to his authority and direction, one might question whether you possess the independence necessary for informed consent. The insult hung in the air like smoke from a dirty fire. Elias felt his temper rising, but before he could speak, Sana's voice cut through the tension. Judge Blackwood, is it? Tell me, when you married your wife, did anyone question whether she possessed sufficient independence? Did anyone demand proof that she was not coerced by social expectations, family pressure, or economic necessity? Or was her word considered sufficient because she was white and therefore presumed capable of rational thought? Blackwood's face flushed red. That's entirely different. Different how? Because I am Apache. Because I have proven myself capable of surviving in circumstances that would kill most of your civilized white women. Because I speak 4 languages, can track a man across desert stone, and have killed enemies of my people in honorable combat. Her voice remained level, but there was steel beneath the silk. Or different simply because you believe my brown skin makes me less human than your pale wife. Now see here. No, you see here. Elias stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Sana and the judge. This woman has more courage, intelligence, and integrity in her little finger than most men have in their entire bodies. She's choosing to marry me of her own free will, and if that threatens your narrow little view of how the world should work, that's your problem, not ours. The office fell silent except for the sound of Philip's nervous breathing and the tick of the wall clock marking seconds that felt like hours. Nevertheless, Blackwood said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, territorial law must be followed. Miss Sana will need to demonstrate basic literacy, understanding of Christian marriage vows, and familiarity with the legal obligations of wives under territorial statute. Fine, Sana said calmly. Test me. What followed was the most comprehensive examination Elias had ever witnessed. Blackwood threw every requirement he could think of at Sana, reading passages from legal documents, explaining complex contractual language, demonstrating mathematical calculations required for household management, even reciting biblical passages about wifely duty. She met every challenge with quiet competence that left the judge increasingly frustrated and the clerk openly amazed. Remarkable, Philip whispered after she flawlessly calculated compound interest on a hypothetical loan. Simply remarkable. Is there anything else? Sana asked when Blackwood finally ran out of tests. The judge looked like he'd been chewing on nails. The license will be ready in 3 days. You'll need 2 witnesses for the ceremony, and it must be performed by a licensed minister or territorial official. 3 days it is, Elias said. We'll be back. As they left the office, Elias caught Sana's elbow gently. That was impressive as hell, he said quietly. Impressive and necessary. Men like that judge will always find reasons to deny what they do not want to permit. Better to exceed their expectations than to meet them barely. They walked down the dusty main street toward the church, where Reverend Peter Walsh waited with considerably more grace than Judge Blackwood had shown. Walsh was an old circuit rider, weathered by years of bringing salvation to remote corners of the frontier. He'd seen enough of human nature to know that love came in many forms, not all of them convenient or conventional. Elias, he said warmly, rising from the bench, where he'd been reading his Bible in the afternoon sun, and you must be Miss Sana. I've heard a great deal about you. I imagine you have, she replied carefully. Most of it good, actually. Sheriff Morrison spoke highly of your restraint during that unpleasant business with the Bradley boys. Said you could have killed young Tom but chose mercy instead. Mercy had nothing to do with it. I simply saw no honor in killing a fool. Walsh chuckled. Mercy by any name is still a virtue. Now I understand you two want to be married. Any particular reason for the hurry? People are talking, Elias said. Seem best to make things official before the gossip gets worse. Gossip has a way of dying down once folks find something new to occupy their minds. But marriage, Walsh looked at each of them in turn. Marriage is forever, or ought to be. Are you sure this is what you both want, not just what seems convenient or necessary? It was a fair question and one that deserved an honest answer. Reverend, Elias said slowly, I buried my first wife 5 years ago, and I thought that was the end of love for me. Figured I'd live out my days alone, working my land, and trying not to think about what I'd lost. Then Sana came along, and she made me remember what it felt like to want something more than just survival. He looked at her standing straight and proud in the churchyard, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. Ornaments. She's brave and strong and honest in ways that humble me. She's also stubborn and fierce and dangerous when crossed. But she makes me want to be better than I am, and I can't imagine my life without her in it anymore. Walsh turned to Sana. And you, my dear, what draws you to this man? She was quiet for a long moment, her dark eyes distant with thought. I have spent my life being what others needed me to be, she said finally. Daughter to Nayati, warrior to my people, exile to satisfy their fears. With Elias I am simply myself, not more, not less. He does not try to change me or make me smaller to fit his expectations. He sees my scars and does not turn away. He sees my strength and does not feel diminished by it. She paused, then added more softly, and he makes me feel safe. Not protected from the world's dangers, but safe to be vulnerable with another person. That is a gift I have never received before. The old preacher nodded slowly. Those are good reasons, better than most couples give me. He gestured toward the simple wooden church behind them. I'll be honored to perform the ceremony when you're ready. Just promise me you'll remember these words when the hard times come, and they will come. Love is not just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. We understand, Elias said. Do you? We'll see. They spent the next 3 days in a strange suspension between their old life and their new one. The fence work continued, but it felt different now, not labor to discharge a debt, but shared effort to improve their common home. They talked more, laughed more, found themselves touching casually, in ways that had been forbidden before. But underneath the growing intimacy lay currents of uncertainty and fear. Both had been hurt before, both had learned hard lessons about the fragility of happiness. Neither wanted to voice their doubts, but the doubts were there nonetheless. On the second night, as they sat by their campfire near the half-finished fence, Sana finally spoke what they'd both been thinking. What if we are making a mistake? What kind of mistake? What if this feeling between us is not love, but simply loneliness seeking comfort? What if we marry and discover we are strangers who happen to share a bed and a roof? Elias poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing into the star-filled sky. It was a question that had been gnawing at him too, though he hadn't wanted to examine it too closely. Could be, he said finally. Love's a tricky thing to identify, especially when you're in the middle of it. But I know this much: I'd rather take the risk of being wrong about love than live with the certainty of being alone. And if I truly am cursed, if loving me brings you death or disaster, then I'll face it with you beside me instead of facing it alone. She was quiet for a while, her face unreadable in the firelight. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I am afraid. The admission cost her something. He could see it in the tightness around her eyes, the rigid set of her shoulders. For a woman who had faced down war parties and survived massacre, admitting fear was perhaps the greatest courage of all. So am I, he said simply. What are you afraid of? Failing you, not being the husband you deserve, watching you realize you've made a terrible mistake and having to live with that knowledge every day for the rest of my life. And I am afraid of bringing darkness into your life, of watching you die because you chose to love a cursed woman, of being alone again, but this time with the memory of what I lost. They sat in silence for a moment, their fears laid bare between them like wounds in need of tending. Maybe being afraid is part of it, Elias said finally. Maybe if we weren't scared, it wouldn't mean as much. Or maybe fear is wisdom trying to save us from our own foolishness. Could be that too, but I've been listening to wisdom for 5 years, and all it's gotten me is a cold bed and an empty house. Maybe it's time to listen to something else. On their wedding day, they rose before dawn and rode into Broken Mesa, dressed in their finest clothes and carrying their deepest hopes. The morning was crisp and clear with the kind of crystalline light that made every detail stand out sharp as a photograph. The mountains seemed closer somehow, as if the world had contracted to witness this moment. A small crowd had gathered outside the church, not all friendly but curious enough to want to see the Apache woman marry the white rancher. Elias recognized most of the faces: Mrs. Henderson with her perpetual frown, Tom Bradley nursing his wounded pride, a handful of ranch hands and their wives, Sheriff Morrison, looking official and slightly worried. But there were friendly faces too. Old Pete from the livery stable, who'd always treated Elias with honest respect. Mary Sullivan from the cafe, whose Irish heritage had taught her something about being an outsider. Dr. James Mitchell, the territory's only physician, who'd delivered more babies and tended more wounds than any man should have to see. Quite a turnout, Sana observed, her voice steady despite the attention focused on them. Broken Mesa doesn't get many weddings between Apache warriors and white ranchers, Elias replied. Folks are naturally curious. Curious or hoping to see us fail. Both, probably. Inside the church, Reverend Walsh waited at the simple wooden altar, his Bible open and his expression serene. The building was small and plain, with rough-hewn pews and windows that let in squares of golden morning light. It smelled of pine wood and beeswax candles of prayers offered and hopes shared. They took their places before the altar, Sana's hand resting lightly on Elias's arm. She looked beautiful and fierce in her beaded dress, her dark hair braided with silver ornaments that caught the light like stars. He felt like a plain man standing beside a queen, but her presence steadied him rather than intimidating him. Dearly beloved, Walsh began, his voice carrying easily through the small space. We are gathered here today to witness the union of Elias Halt and Sana, daughter of Nayati, in the bonds of holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but with reverence, honor, and the full understanding that what God joins together no man should put asunder. The familiar words washed over them, heavy with tradition and meaning. Elias found himself thinking of Sarah, wondering what she would have made of this moment. Somehow he thought she would have approved. She'd always believed that love was too precious to waste on conventional expectations. Elias, Walsh continued, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? I do. The words came out stronger than he'd expected, carrying absolute conviction. And Sana, do you take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, for better or worse, till death do you part? She looked at him then, her storm-dark eyes holding his with unwavering intensity. I do, she said clearly, and the words seemed to echo in the sudden silence that followed. Then, by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Walsh smiled warmly. Elias, you may kiss your bride. The kiss was gentle, tentative, a promise rather than a demand. Her lips were soft and warm, and for just a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. There was only Sana, only this moment, only the beginning of whatever came next. When they broke apart, the small congregation erupted in a mixture of applause and murmured conversation. Some of it was supportive, some skeptical, most simply curious about what would happen next. As they walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Elias caught sight of a familiar figure standing in the back of the church. Nayati dressed in his finest ceremonial clothing, his weathered face unreadable. Their eyes met for just a moment, and the old war chief gave a single slight nod approval acceptance, or perhaps just acknowledgement that his daughter had chosen her path. Then he was gone, vanished as silently as smoke on the wind. Outside the church, the crowd began to disperse, some offering congratulations, others simply staring as if trying to memorize the moment for future gossip. Sheriff Morrison approached them with a careful smile. "Congratulations," he said formally. "I hope you'll both be very happy." "Thank you, Sheriff," Elias replied. "I believe we will be." Morrison hesitated, then lowered his voice. "Word of advice, lay low for a while. Let folks get used to the idea. There are some who aren't happy about this union, and they might be looking for an excuse to cause trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that comes with torches and rope. Just be careful." As they rode home through the afternoon sun, Sana was unusually quiet. Elias glanced at her several times, trying to read her mood. "Regrets already?" he asked finally. "No regrets, but no certainty either. I keep expecting to feel different, transformed somehow. Instead, I feel like the same woman who woke up this morning, only now I wear a different name. Maybe that's how it's supposed to feel. Maybe the big changes come gradually, too small to notice day by day." "Perhaps." She was quiet for another moment, then asked, "Did you see my father in the church?" "I did. He seemed accepting. He was honoring the choice I made, even though he does not understand it. That is more than I expected." They rode in comfortable silence after that, following the familiar trail toward home. But as they topped the rise that gave them their first view of the valley, they both stopped short. Smoke was rising from the direction of the ranch house, not the thin gray smoke of a cooking fire, but the thick black smoke of destruction. "No!" Elias whispered, spurring thunder into a gallop. They raced down the hillside, Sana keeping pace beside him on her paint horse. As they drew closer, the full extent of the disaster became clear. The barn was burning flames, reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. The corral had been torn down, and his horses were scattered across the pasture. Windows in the house had been smashed, and someone had painted crude words across the front door. In the yard, nailed to a fence post, was a crudely lettered sign, "No squaw lovers welcome." They dismounted quickly, Elias running toward the burning barn while Sana checked the house for further damage. The fire was too far advanced to save the structure, but they might be able to prevent it from spreading to the other buildings. "The well!" he shouted. "Help me get the buckets." For the next hour they fought the fire with desperate determination, drawing water from the well and throwing it on the flames in a futile attempt to save what they could. By the time it was over, the barn was a smoldering ruin, and half their winter hay supply had gone up in smoke. They stood in the yard as the sun set behind them, covered in soot and ash, surveying the destruction that had been someone's wedding gift to them. "Well," Sana said, finally, her voice steady despite everything, "it appears your neighbors have made their feelings clear." "I'm sorry," Elias said, his voice thick with rage and grief. "I'm so damn sorry you have to deal with this because of me. Because of you." She turned to face him, her eyes flashing with anger. "This happened because small minds cannot accept what they do not understand. This happened because cowards hide behind darkness to do what they dare not do in daylight. This is not your fault any more than it is mine. But if you hadn't, what shown basic human decency, offered marriage instead of slavery, chosen love over loneliness." She stepped closer, her voice growing fierce. "Do not apologize for being a good man, Elias Holt. Apologize for many things if you must, but never for that." He looked at her, then really looked at her, and saw not defeat, but defiance. Her wedding dress was torn and stained with ash, her face streaked with soot, her hair coming loose from its careful braids. She looked like a warrior preparing for battle. "What do we do now?" he asked. "Now? She smiled, and there was steel in it. Now we rebuild. We make this place stronger than it was before, and we show these cowards that they have not broken us. They have only made us more determined to succeed. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they walked hand in hand toward their damaged house, ready to begin the long work of building something that could not be burned down, a love strong enough to withstand whatever storms might come. Behind them, the barn's ruins still glowed with dying embers, but ahead lay the promise of tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. They would face them together, and that made all the difference in the world. The first morning of their married life dawned gray and cold, with autumn clouds hanging low over the mountains like a shroud. Sana woke before sunrise, as was her habit, and found herself momentarily disoriented by the familiar room that was now officially hers. The wedding ring on her finger, a simple band of silver that had belonged to Elias's grandmother, caught the pale light filtering through the damaged window. Beside her, Elias stirred from his sleep, his face peaceful in a way she'd never seen it before. They had spent their wedding night not in passion, but in practical planning, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and ledger books, calculating the cost of rebuilding and deciding what could wait until spring. It was perhaps the most unromantic beginning to a marriage imaginable, but it felt right somehow, two practical people facing hard realities together. She dressed quietly and stepped outside to survey the damage in daylight. The burned barn looked even worse than it had the night before, its blackened skeleton reaching toward the sky. Like accusing fingers, the acrid smell of charred wood and ruined hay hung heavy in the still air. But as she walked through the destruction, Sana felt something unexpected rising in her chest. Not despair, but determination. She had survived the massacre of her birth family, the loss of 3 husbands, exile from her adopted people. A burned barn and some broken windows were obstacles, not defeats. "Morning, wife," came Elias's voice from the porch. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. In the gray morning light, he looked older than his years, the weight of responsibility and worry etched in the lines around his eyes. "Good morning, husband." The word felt strange on her tongue, foreign, but not unwelcome. "I was thinking about the barn, and we rebuild it bigger, stronger, with stone foundations that will not burn." She gestured toward the creek. "And we dig a proper irrigation ditch from the water to create a fire break around all the buildings." Elias joined her in the yard, his boots crunching on scattered debris. "That'll take most of our savings, plus whatever we can borrow. Then we borrow, and we work, and we show these cowards that their nighttime courage has accomplished nothing but to make us stronger." He studied her face, looking for cracks in her resolve. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "All right then, bigger and stronger it is." He paused, then added, "Sana, about last night. What about it? I know this wasn't the wedding night you probably imagined. Sitting up talking about lumber costs and loan rates instead of other things." She looked at him with those dark, unreadable eyes, and for a moment he thought she might be offended. Then her mouth quirked into something that might have been a smile. "Elias, I am a woman who has buried 3 husbands. Romance is a luxury I learned not to expect. But partnership, real partnership built on trust and shared purpose, that is something I have never had. Do not apologize for giving me what I need instead of what convention says I should want." Relief flooded his features. "So we're all right then." "We are all right." The next weeks passed in a blur of back-breaking labor and careful planning. They worked from sunrise to sunset, clearing debris, salvaging what they could, and preparing for the major reconstruction that would come with spring. Sana proved as capable with hammer and saw as she had been with pickaxe and shovel, her warrior's strength and endurance serving her well in this new kind of battle. The people of Broken Mesa watched their efforts with mixed reactions. Some, like Dr. Mitchell and Mary Sullivan, stopped by to offer help or supplies. Others, following the Bradleys' lead, made their disapproval clear through cold stares and pointed comments. Most simply watched and waited, curious to see whether the unusual marriage would survive its first test. "They're taking bets in the saloon," Sheriff Morrison mentioned during one of his periodic check-ins. "Even money, you two will be separated by Christmas." "And what did you wager?" Sana asked dryly. Morrison grinned. $20 says you're still together come spring, working twice as hard and twice as happy as any of them. It was during the third week after the barn fire that the first real test of their resolve arrived. Elias was in town picking up supplies when 3 riders approached the ranch. Jim Bradley and 2 men Sana didn't recognize, hard-looking types with the kind of eyes that had seen too much violence and grown comfortable with it. She was repairing the corral fence when they rode up, her rifle propped against a nearby post within easy reach. The men dismounted without invitation, their boots loud on the packed earth. "Mrs. Halt," Bradley said with exaggerated courtesy. "How nice to see you again." "Mr. Bradley." She continued working, but her senses were fully alert. 3 against 1, and her rifle was 15 feet away. Not impossible odds, but not favorable either. "Heard you folks had some trouble on your wedding night. Terrible shame, that. Course, some might say you brought it on yourselves, mixing races and all. Some might say many things. That does not make them true." One of Bradley's companions, a lean man with dead eyes and scarred hands, stepped closer. "Awful lot of work for a woman alone. Where's your husband?" "He will return." "When?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Sana straightened slowly, her hand moving casually toward the knife at her hip. "Soon enough," she said calmly. "See, that's the thing about white men," the scarred man continued, moving to her left while his companion circled right. "They make promises easy enough, but when times get hard, they tend to remember that Apache women ain't really their problem. My husband is not most white men." "No. Well, let's see how faithful he is when he comes home to find his squaw wife has decided to run off. Back to her people maybe, or just disappeared." The threat was clear enough. Sana measured distances, calculated angles, and made her choice. "Mr. Bradley," she said conversationally, "are you familiar with Apache war customs? What's that got to do with anything? When we take prisoners, we have rituals. Ways of testing courage, of determining whether a man dies quickly or slowly. I learned these rituals as a child, practiced them as a warrior." Her voice remained perfectly level, even friendly. "Your companions here move like men accustomed to violence. They think this makes them dangerous, but they have never faced an Apache woman protecting her home." The scarred man's hand dropped toward his gun. "Big talk for a woman alone." "Alone?" Sana smiled, and there was death in it. "You think I am alone?" Before anyone could react, she gave a sharp whistle that echoed across the valley. Within seconds, armed figures emerged from concealment, behind the house, among the cottonwoods by the creek, in the tall grass near the pasture. 6 Apache warriors, including Kestrel, her brother, all with rifles trained on the 3 white men. The change in the situation was instantaneous and absolute. Bradley's face went white as bone, while his hired guns froze like rabbits under a hawk's shadow. "You see," Sana continued in that same conversational tone, "Apache women are never truly alone. We have brothers, cousins, friends who remember old debts and old loyalties. Did you think my marriage meant I was cast off completely? That I had no one left who cared whether I lived or died?" Kestrel stepped forward, his rifle centered on Bradley's chest. When he spoke, his English was careful but clear. "Sister, these men trouble you. They speak of making me disappear, of testing my husband's faithfulness." "Ah." Kestrel's young face hardened with warrior's resolve. "Then perhaps they need to learn what happens to men who threaten Apache women." "Now hold on," Bradley stammered. "We didn't mean nothing by it. Just neighborly conversation, that's all." "Neighborly," Sana repeated thoughtfully. Yes, let us discuss what it means to be neighbors. In Apache custom, neighbors help each other, protect each other's families, show respect for each other's ways. But some neighbors, she gestured toward the burned barn, some neighbors bring fire in the night and hatred in the day. The scarred man was sweating despite the cool air. Look, lady, we don't want no trouble with your people. We'll just ride out peaceful like. Will you? And what guarantee do I have that you will not return with more men, more threats, more violence? It was Elias who answered, his voice cutting through the tension. As he rode into the yard, Thunder's hooves striking the ground like thunder. He took in the scene at a glance, the three white men surrounded by Apache warriors, Sana standing calm and deadly in the center of it all. The guarantee, he said, dismounting with deliberate slowness, is that if they so much as set foot on my land again, I'll kill them myself. Halt, this ain't what it looks like, Bradley began. It looks like 3 men threatening my wife while I was away. Elias's voice was quietly furious. It looks like the same cowards who burned my barn deciding to try intimidation in daylight. How close am I? You were just leaving. Elias stepped closer, his hand resting on his gun butt. All 3 of you, right now, and if I hear of any more accidents befalling my property, any more threats against my wife, I'll assume it's connected to this conversation and act accordingly. The 3 men mounted their horses with unseemly haste, their bravado evaporating under the combined pressure of Apache rifles and Elias's cold fury. As they rode away, Bradley called back over his shoulder, "This ain't over, halt. You can't hide behind savages forever." "I'm not hiding behind anyone," Elias replied. "I'm standing with my wife and her family. They're a difference." After the riders disappeared over the hill, the Apache warriors began to fade back into concealment as silently as they'd appeared. Only Kestrel remained approaching his sister with something like pride in his young face. "You have chosen well, sister. This man stands with you when trouble comes. As you stood with me, brother, I am grateful." Kestrel clasped hands briefly with Elias, warrior to warrior. "My sister's husband is my brother, her enemies are my enemies, and her family is my family," Elias replied. "Thank you." After Kestrel rode away to rejoin the others, Sana and Elias stood alone in the yard, processing what had just occurred. "How long have they been watching?" Elias asked. "Since the night after the barn burned. Nayati sent them 6 warriors, taking turns keeping guard until they were sure we could defend ourselves. And you didn't think to mention this. Would it have changed anything? Would you have acted differently knowing you had Apache protection?" Elias considered this. "No, probably not." "Then there was no need to mention it. You acted with honor because honor is your nature, not because you knew you were safe." That evening, as they shared a simple meal by lamplight, the conversation turned to the future with a new urgency. "Bradley won't let this go," Elias said. "He's been humiliated twice now, and men like him don't forgive that kind of thing. No, they do not. And next time he will come with more men better prepared." "So what do we do?" Sana set down her fork and looked at him across the table. "We could leave. Sell the ranch, take what we can, and start fresh somewhere else. Colorado, maybe, or California. Is that what you want? What I want is to live in peace with my husband, to build something lasting, to prove that love can survive anything the world throws at it." She paused, her dark eyes reflecting the lamplight. "But I will not ask you to die for pride. It's not pride, it's principle. We run now, we will be running the rest of our lives. Besides," he reached across to take her hand, "this is our home, our land. I'll be damned if I let small-minded bigots drive us away from it. Then we stay and fight. We stay and fight." The first snow came early that year, dusting the mountains white in late October and reminding everyone that winter was approaching with unusual haste. Elias and Sana worked frantically to prepare, knowing that the cold months would bring their own challenges and that their enemies might see isolation as an opportunity. They were cutting firewood in the grove by the creek when Sana suddenly straightened her hand going to her belly with a look of wonder and surprise. "What is it?" Elias asked, setting down his axe. I think—" She pressed both hands to her stomach, her eyes wide with a mixture of joy and fear. "Elias, I think I'm with child." The words hit him like a physical blow. A child. Their child. The dream he'd buried with Sarah suddenly blazing to life again. "Are you sure?" "My monthly bleeding has not come for 2 months, and this morning I was sick when I smelled the bacon cooking, and just now I felt movement." He dropped the axe and crossed to her, in 2 quick strides, his hands joining hers on her still flat belly. "How long?" 3 months, maybe 4. "The child will come in late spring." They stood there in the falling snow, hands pressed to the new life growing between them, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what this meant. A child would change everything, their priorities, their vulnerabilities, their reasons for fighting. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Happy, I'm terrified and thrilled and grateful all at the same time." He looked at her face, seeing his own wonder reflected there. "Are you?" "I am afraid to be happy, afraid to hope too much, because of what happened before. Because I have learned that the things I love most are the things most likely to be taken from me." He pulled her close, then holding her against his chest, while the snow fell around them like benediction. "Nothing's going to happen to this baby. Nothing's going to happen to you, I promise." "You cannot promise such things. Watch me." That night they made love for the first time as husband and wife, not with desperate passion, but with tender reverence for the miracle growing within her. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the warm darkness, Sana spoke the fear that had been growing in her heart. "What if the curse follows me still? What if I lose this child as I lost the others?" "What others?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she told him about the babies who had never drawn breath. Mangus's son, born too early and too weak to survive the harsh winter. Naelnish's daughter, taken by the same smallpox that killed her father. The child she'd carried for Dakota, lost in the 3rd month when grief and stress proved too much for her body to bear. 3 husbands, 3 children, she whispered into the darkness. All gone, all proof the council's judgment that I bring death to whatever I love most. That's not curse, that's just life. Hard, unfair, brutal life. He tightened his arms around her as if he could protect her from her own fears by simple force of will. "This time will be different. How can you be so certain? Because this time you're not alone. This time you have someone fighting beside you instead of just standing by watching. This time the curse has to go through me to get to you." Winter settled over the valley with unusual severity, bringing blizzards that lasted for days and temperatures that made even simple chores an ordeal. But the season also brought unexpected gifts. The isolation that made them vulnerable to human enemies also provided protection. No one friend or foe could easily reach the ranch through the deep snow and bitter cold. Elias used the enforced confinement to begin planning their new barn sketching designs by firelight and calculating materials and costs. Sana spent her time preparing for the baby, sewing tiny clothes from soft cotton, and learning the mysteries of caring for infants from a book Dr. Mitchell had loaned her. "Listen to this," she said one evening, reading aloud from the medical text. "It says here that expectant mothers should avoid excitement, strenuous activity, and strong emotions, that they should rest frequently and take gentle walks for exercise." Sounds reasonable. It also says they should avoid riding horses, lifting heavy objects, or engaging in any activity that might jar the developing child. Elias looked up from his sketching. And yesterday, I helped you stack 2 cords of firewood, spent an hour chopping ice off the water trough, and rode to the north pasture to check on the cattle." She closed the book with a snap. "I think this doctor has never met an Apache woman. Maybe we should be more careful anyway, just to be safe." "Careful, yes. Helpless, no. I will not spend the next 5 months sitting in a chair like an invalid." Their first real test came in January, when a blizzard that lasted 3 days buried the valley under 4 feet of snow. On the second night, with the wind howling like demons around the house, they heard a sound that made them both reach for their weapons, someone pounding on the front door. Elias peered through the frost-covered window, his rifle ready. In the swirling snow, he could make out a single figure on foot, hunched against the storm. "Please," came a woman's voice, barely audible over the wind. "Please help me." Against his better judgment, Elias opened the door. A young woman stumbled inside, her clothes torn and frozen, her face blue with cold. She was obviously Mexican, with dark hair and features, and she was pregnant, very pregnant. "Gracias," she gasped, collapsing near the fireplace. "Gracias a Dios." Sana was already moving, wrapping the stranger in blankets and checking for frostbite, while Elias barred the door and kept watch at the windows. "What's your name?" Sana asked gently, speaking in Spanish. "Maria. Maria Sandoval, my husband. They killed him, shot him down like a dog." "Who killed him?" "Bandits. They came to our homestead 3 days ago, looking for money, food, horses. When Miguel tried to protect me, they—" She dissolved into tears. Elias and Sana exchanged glances. A pregnant woman alone in a blizzard, her husband murdered by bandits. It was the kind of situation that demanded help, regardless of the risks involved. "How far along?" Sana asked, noting the size of Maria's belly. 9 months, maybe more. The baby, I think it's coming." As if summoned by her words, Maria suddenly gasped and doubled over, clutching her stomach. Her water broke in a rush, staining the floor and confirming their worst fears. "Elias," Sana said calmly, "I need hot water, clean towels, and that medical book. Now. You know how to deliver a baby." "I have watched Apache midwives, and I have delivered calves and foals. The principle is similar." For the next 6 hours, while the blizzard raged outside, Sana guided Maria through the ancient process of bringing new life into the world. Elias played assistant, following orders and trying not to think about how this experience would prepare them or terrify them for their own child's birth. Finally, as dawn broke gray and cold over the snow-covered valley, a baby's cry pierced the exhausted silence. Maria's son entered the world, healthy and strong, his lungs announcing his displeasure with the cold, bright world beyond the womb. "Un milagro," Maria whispered, tears streaming down her face as Sana placed the baby in her arms. "A miracle." "All babies are miracles," Sana replied softly, her hand moving unconsciously to her own belly. They kept Maria and her son for 2 weeks, until the weather cleared enough for safe travel. Dr. Mitchell confirmed that both mother and child were healthy, and Sheriff Morrison arranged for Maria to stay with a Mexican family in town until she could decide what to do next. "You saved their lives," Morrison told Elias and Sana as they prepared to take Maria to town. "Not many folks would have opened their door to a stranger in that storm." "Not many folks would have had a choice," Elias replied. "Couldn't hardly leave a pregnant woman to freeze on our doorstep." But Sana saw deeper meaning in the experience. Maria had arrived at their door when winter and human cruelty had conspired to threaten her and her unborn child. They had provided shelter, safety, and skilled care that ensured both mother and baby survived. Perhaps it was a sign. Perhaps instead of bringing death to those she loved, she was meant to bring life. As spring approached and the snow began to melt, revealing the green grass and wildflowers beneath, other changes became apparent. Sana's belly rounded with their growing child. Her movements became more careful but no less determined, and her face took on the serene glow that expectant mothers had worn since the beginning of time. They were discussing names one evening in late March, Elias favoring traditional English names like John or Sarah, Sana preferring Apache names that honored natural forces, when riders appeared on the horizon again. But this time, it was not enemies approaching. Sheriff Morrison led a small group that included Dr. Mitchell, Reverend Walsh, and surprisingly, several families from town carrying supplies and tools. "What's all this?" Elias asked as they dismounted in the yard. "Spring barn raising," Morrison announced. "Figured you folks could use some help getting that new barn built before the baby comes." Mary Sullivan stepped forward, her Irish accent thick with emotion. "We heard about you taking in that poor Mexican girl during the blizzard. Anybody decent enough to risk their own safety for a stranger deserves help when they need it." Dr. Mitchell nodded agreement. "Besides, we can't have babies born in territories without proper barns, highly irregular from a medical standpoint." Even some faces Elias didn't recognize had come to help ranchers from the surrounding area who'd heard the story of the Apache woman who'd saved Maria Sandoval and her son. Whatever differences they might have about race and custom, they respected courage and compassion when they saw it. The barn raising took 3 days, with more volunteers arriving each morning as word spread. By the time they finished, Elias and Sana had not just a new barn, but something they'd never expected acceptance from at least part of their community. "Appears you've got more friends than you thought," Morrison observed as the last of the volunteers prepared to leave. "Appears so," Elias agreed, his arm around Sana's shoulders. Jim Bradley and his allies had not participated in the barn raising, and their absence was noted by everyone present. The battle lines were clearly drawn now, those who could accept change and those who would fight it to their last breath. But for the moment, standing in their yard, watching neighbors become friends, Sana and Elias allowed themselves to hope that love might indeed be stronger than hate, that courage might triumph over fear, that their child might grow up in a world slightly more accepting than the one they had known. The baby came on a morning in late May, when the valley was dressed in its spring finery of wildflowers and new grass. Sana's labor was long but uncomplicated, attended by Dr. Turner, Mitchell, and 3 Apache women who had come despite tribal disapproval to help their sister in her hour of need. Elias paced the porch like a caged wolf, listening to the sounds from inside the house and remembering every story he'd ever heard about women dying in childbirth. When the baby's first cry finally split the morning air, he nearly collapsed with relief. "It's a boy," Dr. Mitchell announced, emerging with a tired smile. "Strong as an ox and loud as a cavalry bugle. Congratulations, Father." Inside, Sana lay exhausted but radiant. Their son nestled in her arms like the most precious treasure ever discovered. The baby was perfect, 10 tiny fingers, 10 tiny toes, a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages despite being only minutes old. "He's beautiful," Elias whispered, touching one impossibly small hand with his finger. "He is ours," Sana replied simply, "and he is alive." They named him Samuel Nayati Halt, Samuel for Elias's father Nayati, to honor the Apache grandfather who had started this unlikely journey, Halt to mark his place in the family they were building together. As Elias held his son for the first time, feeling the tiny heart beating against his chest, he understood something fundamental about courage. It wasn't the absence of fear, it was the decision to act in spite of fear, to choose hope over despair, to believe that love was worth whatever price it demanded. Outside, the sun climbed higher in a sky so blue it hurt to look at, painting the valley in shades of gold and green that spoke of new beginnings and endless possibilities. In the distance, mountains stood eternal and unchanging, but in the small house by the creek, everything had changed forever. The curse was broken, the debt was paid, and the future stretched ahead like an unwritten book waiting for their story to fill its pages.